What's up, guys? Thanks for tuning into another Valaverse YouTube video. We've got a really awesome topic today. We are going to be talking about scales, something that is a highly contested subject matter in the toy industry. So, got a couple different scales here. So why don't we get on in and see which one is the best offer. All right, so we've got a bunch of different size figures here, and I'm going to be talking about each one and my thoughts on scale. Because as we know, there's so many different things that we love to collect in the toy world and toy community, but there's so many different scales. And, scales have been something that has changed since, the beginning of time with toys. We had, look at something like G.I. Joe, where you had in the 60s and 70s 12-inch figures, and then in the 80s it went to 3 3/4, and then it rose to 4 inches, and now it's 6 inches. So, and then in between there you had, the Sigma 6, which ended up being this weird like 9-inch scale. So scale is like kind of one of those things that is such a broad range in toy, and so many of us, collect different scales, but then there's many of us that stick to like a specific scale. So I figured, why not just talk about it? Because I, as a collector, collect a lot of scales. I've also worked on almost all of these scales of figures, and I have a company that does a certain scale of figures. So this is kind of just my opinion. I'm not saying that you should only collect this scale, or, this scale is wrong, or this scale is not, economically efficient. It's just kind of my take as someone who has produced stuff, who's collected stuff. And, hopefully you guys find it helpful, and maybe you'll be like, yeah, it's like I was thinking of maybe collecting hot toys, but, you kind of sold me, or, oh yeah, I think it's okay to make the switch over to 6-inch. So I'm going to get on into what I have in front of me. I'm going to go through, everything from 3 3/4, 4-inch, 6-inch, 12-inch, and even quarter scale. And yeah, so let's see, what do I want to start with? We'll start with the OG, G.I. Joe. My all-time favorite toy line. Yes, I did say that. G.I. Joe is my all-time favorite toy line. These figures, 3 3/4, but also on the heels of Kenner Star Wars, they were, 3 3/4, Kenner Indiana Jones, 3 3/4, and people can say that spawned off of what the Fisher-Price Adventure people were. So, that smaller scale was a starting scale. But again, before that, you had 12-inch Joes in the 60s, but, Joes with soft goods and multiple parts, kind of like, almost like a modern day hot toy. It was like G.I. Joe was ahead of its time. They were hot toys for back then. But G.I. Joe came along and they did something really like amazing with this line, because they ended up doing crazy things with articulation and the build, and they made a very highly articulated figure for the time, whereas, the Kenner Indiana Jones stuff wasn't that great as far as articulation goes, and even Star Wars, basic 5-point articulated figures, which were great, we all had them, but G.I. Joe really set the bar, especially when they brought in, the swivel bicep, great constructed figures. I mean, they had their flaws, how many of us had crotches break and backpacks break off in the hole, or feet break from putting them on the stands, or thumbs break. But, again, toys, they're plastic. They're not meant to be, like a cinder block. So they do tend to break. And back then, I don't think they were thinking of collectors, I got to make sure my Mickey Mouse Cobra Commander has, the emblem fully intact. They weren't thinking that back then. They were just making toys for kids, and things past certain, testing guidelines, and that's what they put out. But G.I. Joe really revolutionized the 3 3/4-inch figure market. And, they were able to do it so that they could do play sets and vehicles, and they did such a wide range of figures. They did, almost 400 figures through Real American Hero, maybe more than that, but I know it was definitely over 350. And then you saw interesting things where Hasbro was taking this same G.I. Joe build and putting it into almost 5.5-inch figures with their Cops line. They same O-ring construction, same T-bar in the crotch area, but 4-inch, it had such longevity to it, and there are still collectors to this day that's their scale. the 1/18th scale collector. They're like almost like the 12-inch Joe fans. It's like they're really hardcore in 12-inch Joe, and then the 4-inch fans are really hardcore in the 4-inch, and they're like, nope, we won't go 6-inch. I mean, I'll get into 6-inch as we go along, but even Joe's evolved, and they went from 3 3/4 to like a 4 and like 4 1/8 inch figure, and that started in around 2007 with the 25th anniversary line. This is a 30th anniversary figure, but same scale, and they really like that. I felt like really, again, G.I. Joe was always like stepping up the game. And when they brought out these 4-inch figures with their detail and their articulation and all their accessories, like that 2007 and then into 08 and 09, and then I said that Pursuit of Cobra is my favorite era of G.I. Joe. I think they're the best looking figures, the best constructed figures. They were just flawless. Going into 30th anniversary was really great. Even into the Retaliation, you had really great looking figures. But again, it kind of evolved. But the interesting thing is, I felt like the 4-inch line took the 3 3/4 inch fans with them. So it was like, yeah, they went up a little scale, and I think people felt like it was enough that they could have them all on their shelves, and it's not like going from 3 3/4 to 6-inch. So, that's why the 4-inch lines did so well. And it was always interesting that they didn't just do 3 3/4 inch, and I think that was because of the articulation. I think in order to get the level of articulation they did with these figures, they went to 4 inches to give them a little more room and range. But again, very hardcore fan base here. I think that the 3 3/4 4-inch was a great scale, and it was a scale that I always loved. To me, I wasn't a 6-inch fan. So, when Marvel Universe became Marvel Universe, like Legends was out, and then Legends switched over to 4-inch. I thought that was great because that was my scale. I didn't collect Legends. I wanted to collect Universe. And then having to be able to get to work on Universe, called a bunch of different things as time went on, but like that was awesome because that was my favorite scale. But then this is where I sort of started to switch my thinking, is when I got to produce both 4-inch figures and 6-inch figures at the same time. And that was a transition period. This was around the 2014, 2015 time where Legends was really taking off. Now, Legends came around in 2000. It was like Spider-Man Classics, revolutionized action figures, double elbows, double knees. The level of articulation and detail and stuff that Toy Biz was doing was unheard of. They like really created this new scale with 6-inch. And that was surviving, because before then you had things like McFarland doing like 5-inch figures, but still almost like 7 POA at that point, or 8. And then Legends came around, and Legends, like we saw Legends, it was mind blowing. But then I still like didn't fully like get over, because I still had a lot of Power of the Force 2 Star Wars stuff and G.I. Joe. So to me, that 3 3/4 4-inch scale was my scale, even though 6-inch was pretty epic. Then, for some reason, Marvel had switched. They went, when it went over to Hasbro, they did Legends for a little bit, but then they went over to 3 3/4 or 4-inch. And that was really cool line. The line wasn't great at first, but they fixed it really fast. Like when they started coming out with that Cyclops and Daredevil body, like those were really great figures. And then again, when I was at Hasbro and I got to work on that Universe line, I was like, this is awesome. But again, to that transition period, the times are changing, prices were going up. Legends, I'm trying to remember what Legends were at that time. They might have been $20, and Universe was like 12. They were going to 12. And it was like, wow, you're going to 12. But in order to keep it at 12, we had to start cutting articulation and cutting accessories out of it. So I was excited to work on this scale, but also it hurt because I had to make almost like a dumbed down version of it. It wasn't as cool as what it was in years prior. But it was because Legends was, starting to, take the lead, and, Universe just wasn't an economical brand at like scale at the time. So like, oh, we'll go up to 12, but it was just like the fans were mad because raised the price from 10 to 12, but then you got rid of a lot of the aspects of of the figure that made it great. So I got to see that you got more bang for your buck with 6-inch. Also, it's like the costing and things like that. Like what it costs to tool a 4-inch figure, it wasn't much more to tool a 6-inch figure. So it just made more sense. So now going from 4-inch to 6-inch, we'll kind of get into the 6-inch area. It was a better scale in the sense that once I started working on it and I saw like what you could do with 6-inch, the articulation, the detail, it was like, wow, okay, you can do way more with 6-inch. And then I slowly started to become a 6-inch fan. And Black Series was coming out, and that was really an epic move for them to switch from Star Wars, which yes, they did 12-inch figures here and there, but their main scale was the 1/18 scale. They did the same thing with Power of the Force, where they almost went over to something like this, like a 4-inch, but Lucasfilm was very much like you have to make the figures in scale to each other. Like, for instance, Harrison Ford's like over 6 feet, Mark Hamill's under 6 feet. So the Luke Skywalker figures look little compared to the Han Solo figures, so everything was in scale with each other. Whereas G.I. Joe, everything was like the same height. So for Star Wars to then go to like 6-inch, that was a huge move because they had this enormous library of just years and hundreds and thousands of figures that they did since Power of the Force 2. So going over to 6-inch, it was like, whoa, okay. But it was like people wanted it, And then we see it with G.I. Joe Classified. It's like I did the 6-inch Joe line when I was there, and we were just about to cut tools, and they cut the line because they canceled the third movie. But it was like I was trying to tell them at the time, upper management, they were like, well, no, we don't want to do the line because there's no entertainment behind it. And I said, you don't need entertainment for this line. This line will sell on its own because the fans want it. They weren't going to listen to me. Sure enough, years later, we see that the line survived without entertainment. But, I think because of Legends and then the 6-inch scale market and then Black Series, like people started to accept that 6-inch was the new scale. Less and less 4-inch, 3 3/4 stuff was being made. More 6-inch stuff was being made because I felt like you get more bang for your buck. You could do more. The prices were going up, but it's just a more detailed figure. It just looks, it looks a lot nicer on your shelf. You could do so much more posing. This is where action figure photography started getting more prevalent. And I think, what you could do with a 6-inch figure really checks a lot of boxes for figure photography. But at the same time with 6-inch, you started to get ranges. So while, yes, like a Legends Black Series Action Force type figure is like the generic sort of 6-inch offering, you have companies like Mafex and Mezco doing 6-inch figures with soft goods and more articulation, more detail. So, within each scale you have ranges. Not so much in the 4-inch. It was like the value you got was the value you got. But then 6-inch, it was like, wow, you can do a $25 figure, or you could do a $100 figure, an $80 figure. Like, you see with these guys, and it's like, they got bendy wire capes, and it's just a more premium offering, when Mezco started coming around with all their soft goods and stuff, it was pretty crazy. But it was like, whoa, like, okay, they looked at it like, okay, 6-inch is the scale. Let's just do a different offering of 6-inch. So now you can have 6-inch collectors that are like, oh, I want a more premium figure, or I want this, or I want that. And all of it can kind of live together because it's all around the same scale. Now, there's going to be that debate of, well, Legends aren't a true 6-inch. They're called, 1/12, but they're like 6 1/4, 6.5. Like my Action Force figures are 6 1/4. Whereas like a true 6-inch is almost like a figure arts figure, where if you put a figure arts figure next to, a Legends figure, an Action Force figure, they're smaller. But I think we started to adopt like this as being 6-inch. And the good thing is like even Mafex doesn't do that 6-inch. They went to the kind of the Legends scale, which was nice because I love Mafex. But that was where you started to see like the ranges, and then you have your 12-inch figures, which totally other beast. I'm trying to think, like 12-inch started getting hot like in the early 2000s. You had companies like BBI and Dragon they were doing like military figures, SWAT guys. And I remember like those figures looked great. You know, they were doing gear packs and stuff like that. And then, you know, it wasn't something that I was really into. And I'm trying to remember when like Sideshow kind of came around with their 12-inch stuff. Like they were doing Star Wars early on. But now you fast forward to now and it's like Hot Toys. Like there's a Hot Toys Qui-Gon, which this figure is pretty damn near perfect. But seeing what they do, you know, with Hot Toys, and even now you're seeing more companies come into the 12-inch game. InArt is another one that's coming around now. Their figures are more expensive, but they're like museum pieces. They look flawless. So, you know, they're giving kind of Hot Toys a little run there, which is nice because you want competition. But like, you know, the Hot Toys collector, like it's a way different collector than 4-inch or 6-inch, you know, because we can buy tons of these and do a whole lot with them, whereas, you know, one of these figures can be anywhere from, I don't know, $100 and something to up to $300, $400, $500, you know, Hulkbuster and stuff like that. You get, you know, so much more expensive. But the crazy thing is how deep someone like Hot Toys is going. And, you know, the only thing I kind of started getting into was the 12-inch Lord of the Rings done by Asmus Toys. And they're really nice. And you're just like, wow, I can't, you know. And then I started to display my 12-inch figures just recently, only a few days ago. And I started to realize, like, wow, I understand, like, the 12-inch collector now because they display really nice. You know, it's, you know, you can't do as much. I mean, trying to do diorama pieces for 12-inch figures, you know, gets a little crazy. But, you know, I'm not saying that they're not as good. Like each scale has its great points and its not so great points, but it's hard for me now, like starting to look at a 12-inch figure and be like, wow, that's not, you know, that's not my thing. But I look and I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. But cool thing about 12-inch is I dipped my toe in the water with 12-inch working on it for a time. We at Hasbro, this was around 2016, I believe, we were experimenting with doing 12-inch Legends. Now the game plan was, how do we get some of this fan over to Legends? And the idea was, let's do a lower priced 12-inch figure, Marvel figure, you know, that's easier to get. And to me, it was like, knowing the Hot Toys fan, I was kind of like, I don't know if that's a good idea, because I don't think people want a $50 or $75 figure. Like the people that collect this $200 figure want this $200 figure. They don't want less. They don't, they're to them, price doesn't matter. They want quality. Here it's like price and quality kind of even. Here it's like quality. Quality is what you really want. And you see, like, yeah, I'm not saying that, you know, there's only some people that dip their toe into the Hot Toys pool, but you'll see like Hot Toys collectors, they go really deep and they have a ton of them. But it's like the only thing they collect because they're so expensive. But getting back to this, so I didn't think it was a great idea, but I was like, sure, 12-inch Marvel, like great, let's go. Now the original idea was to make them really, really premium. You know, like Thor has soft goods, but the idea was to do like die cast and soft goods and put them in a 5th panel box and make it almost like a Transformers masterpiece, like something really epic. And I think the price point we were going for was $75. But then, you know, once like marketing and sales started showing them to Target and Walmart, I think like Target was like, no, we got to see the figure. So drop down to 50, you know, make it a window box. And I'm like, oh, this is just a scaled up Legend at that point. You know, they missed the point of what we were trying to do. We were trying to make something more premium for this collector, and instead we just made a scaled up 6-inch figure. But I tried to do what I could with them. You know, like I was able to do soft goods and do a lot of different things. But I had so many other things planned for this 12-inch line that I thought could have been really, really cool. And ultimately, you know, the line failed. The crazy thing is the prices on them on the secondary market are really high, especially for the Hulk. But, you know, it was like a short-lived line. I had so many plans to do, you know, other figures like Thanos and some female figures. But, you know, I had a pretty good run of what we did, you know, and I'll always appreciate them. But it definitely missed the mark. And that was typical, marketing and sales not understanding this collector. So, but it had its time, and again, I don't think they can like live like they're the same scale, but I don't think this is night and day. Like, yeah, this is a quality figure, but this thing, again, look how great that figure looks. I'm sure some Hot Toys fans are out there being like, oh man, that's an older figure. There are way better looking figures now. And yes, I'm sure there are, but for me, who's just kind of getting it to 12 inch, like I thought that this was a great figure out of the box. And then it didn't stop at 12 inch because NECA was like, hold my beer. And they were like, let's do quarter scale figures. Now they were doing quarter scale figures back in the very early 2000s, much different than this offering. They did some Lord of the Rings quarter scale figures that were kind of posed out, very limited articulation, but awesome. I have the Aragorn, and they did Legolas, and they had Gandalf. But then they were like, wait, let's do a giant figure that articulates like a 6-inch figure, but quarter scale. And I just got this 89 Batman, and I was like, wow, this thing is absolutely epic. I mean, NECA does a beautiful figure as far as sculpting and deco. I haven't really moved it around too much, but the cape is really nice. It's really heavy, like it looks in the movie. And then they did the quarter scale turtles. I was like, wow, and I've been fighting off buying the quarter scale turtles forever. But it's like, this is a totally different scale. Like, where do you put this? Like, these are kind of one-offs. Now they've done a bunch. They did the Penguin, and I think they did Catwoman. But it's a very niche thing. It hasn't really caught on like the way these scales have. It's just interesting to see it live in this toy world. So I just put it out here because I think it's a very interesting execution. There's something about it that I think could have some longevity, but I don't know for sure. I mean, every scale kind of has its QC things. You talk to Hot Toys fans, they're just like, yeah, man, stuff breaks all the time, and pieces are so small and stuff. But I think once you get to big, heavy figures, the tolerances and the weight, and the torque on the joints is tough. So I wonder how, you could do it. What I really want to do is I want to get my hands on a Mondo figure, because Mondo does 12 inch, but they do 12 inch almost as if it's like this kind of articulation. They're doing soft goods, but they're handling it more like they're letting the articulation speak for itself, not the soft goods. Whereas Hot Toys, the soft goods is what really draws you in. So I'm interested to get a Mondo figure and see how nice they are. That He-Man figure looks really good, Skeletor. So seeing what they do is interesting. I don't know if quarter scale is going to be something that will survive. I'm sure NECA will continue to kind of do one-offs here and there. To me, it's just like, as a manufacturer, the tooling aspect alone for this. Like, I know how big the tools are and how many tools it takes to create this. I can't even begin to imagine the tooling and the tooling expense it is to do a quarter scale figure. So yeah, that's something I don't know if I want to get into. But these three main scales, to me it's like, yes, there have been many scales, 5-inch, and then McFarland does his 7-inch, but it's like at the end of the day, you have your 3 3/4/4-inch fan, got 6-inch, and you got 12-inch. Each scale has its merits. I collect each scale, but you guys love each scale. There's gonna be some of you out there that have all of them. There's gonna be some that's like, nope, I'm 12-inch. Nope, I'm 6-inch. And that's great. That's the cool thing about collecting. And you could have anything you want. But that I just kind of wanted to give you my take on it. As far as a collector, like my point of view as a collector, like what I like to collect. 4-inch and 6-inch, but starting to get into 12-inch. Maybe if I do a part 2 of this, I'll be like, I went down the rabbit hole. Hardcore Hot Toys collector. We'll see. But also give you my take as far as like manufacturing, what it costs and things like that. And like this figure's $200 to $300 because of the soft goods and the paint applications on the face and stuff. Like we're using inkjet printing on the faces for 6-inch figures nowadays. But they're doing something totally different. I would love to see the process, how they do, the painting on the heads for the Hot Toys figures. I know that they still traditionally sculpt by hand the heads, whereas this stuff is done digitally. So it's, that's why it's like, this is like art. Like, I'm not saying this isn't art. I'm saying this is like artwork to me. There's something that has that feel about it. But yeah, so that's my hot take on scales. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Would love to hear what you guys think. What scales do you guys collect? What scales would you like to see maybe Action Force go into? Do you want to see 12-inch Action Force? Listen, I don't even want to say, do you want to see 1/18th Action Force? Because I still hear it to this day that, these fans want 1/18th Action Force. I don't know, probably going to stick to 6-inch or higher. But yeah, who knows? Maybe, enough of you guys want a quarter scale Bone Collector or Steel Brigade. You let me know, maybe we'll do it. So, okay. So we finished filming the video, and then it was discussed that, should we talk about McFarland? Because McFarland is such like a hot company right now. He's doing a ton of stuff. And it would probably be smart to touch on McFarland, because what they're doing is a little different. And, after thinking about it, it's like, okay, so I busted out McFarland figure. I have some. This is just one that I had out of the package. It was an impulse buy because I just thought he looked cool. I didn't know what comic he was from or anything like that. I just thought Batman as a caveman looked pretty cool. But McFarland, what he does is like a 7-inch figure. I don't know if that's 1/10 scale or what that's considered, but they're bigger. They're way bigger. And when I heard that he was doing something bigger, I didn't understand why. Because if you have a superhero line like Legends that has such longevity to it, why would you not do figures that fit in scale? Now, I don't know what is in his contract, but also McFarland, to me, seems like the kind of guy that's like, no, I'm going to do my own thing. So I don't know if that is the case. I can only speculate. But he did something different. I don't agree with it. I would have made it, in the same scale. Like I made my Action Force same as, Legends, Black Series Classified. They should all live together. But he's managed to do this and be successful, because the McFarland stuff sells really well. I know that I always see tons of it on, like, tons of new stuff on shelf. So they're constantly going through it. He's producing a ton of it. He tools a lot. Like, there's not a lot of reuse in McFarland stuff. I know some people are like, no, there's reuse. And yes, there's definitely reuse. But he does not reuse at the level that, like, Legends reuses. He definitely tools a lot of stuff. And he does, like, the bigger scale figures. So yeah, so while they look great, I mean, he does some things that, look, I'm just knocking stuff over constantly. He does stuff that I don't fully agree with. Like, this is a modern day figure that still has visible pins, and all his figures have visible pins. And it's like weird, like you have to like evolve with the toy industry. Like when you see companies that aren't doing double elbows, you're like, why are you not doing double elbows or double knees? Like that's standard stuff. And now it's like pinless. Everyone's doing pinless now, except for McFarland. So it's weird. Like even like Jazzwares with their AEW stuff, they have these huge pins. And I remember when I was working at Jazzwares, one of the things that I tried to stop doing on the Fortnite line was those giant pins. I was like, guys, these pins are way too big. Like you can get way smaller with the pins. Like why are we doing this? But no one wants to listen. But now you have these these AEW and these Fortnite figures with these giant pins, and it's very glaring. Like you see it, and it's like, to me, it draws my eye to it. So I don't know why McFarland hasn't moved to that. He's doing inkjet printing. That's modern, but there's stuff he's not doing. I don't get it. I would love to sit down and talk with them or their team. Be like, why would, like, I'm just curious why you guys, one, went with 7-inch, and two, why don't you do the pinless joints? I know because, some of my Action Force was done at the same factory that produces McFarland stuff. And we do pinless joints. So I know they can do it. It's just, why don't they is the question. I wish I knew. But you know, that's kind of my take on McFarland. I have a lot of McFarland stuff. I have their, all their Avatar stuff. I love Avatar, and they did, that works because those figures are like those in the movie. They were bigger creatures, but like, when you stand, this here is it's just massive, and I just wish that, you can do, figures that were more in scale with each other, because it's like I love my Mafex line, and it's like the McFarland stuff, the Bane and the classic Batman, they can only live on their own. They're very visibly bigger than everything else when they're on your shelf. So yeah, I don't know. I can only sit here and question and speculate, but I figured why not just touch on McFarland as we're talking about scales, just because of how impactful McFarland stuff is on the toy community right now. So there it is. That's my take on McFarland. Thanks guys for checking out the video. Can't wait to hear what you guys think on action figure scales.